Okay, Richard?
One thing about the bindings being preferred and so on is that this is in base and not core. And so one of the approaches we have in base is to make it more about how rather than requiring things. And one of the effects effects this has got, which we may want, but ones that Graham didn't mention, you can't send more than one AIR coding. So if there's two relevant AIR codings, you're only allowed to send one of them. That's one of the implications of this. The other one, and look, that may be a good and sensible thing, but that's one of the things it's doing, which the other alternative doesn't offer. The other thing is it's any SNOMED code winds up being in this slicing. So in the SNOMED slice, it's called an AMT slice, but it's actually a SNOMED slice, the way the discriminator works on that one. So I think that would be so maybe extensible works there. But one of the things we had looked at with base was to make it not terribly restrictive and to put those sorts of restrictive things in core. But this does look strange. Yes, I agree with that.
Wait till you get to the other medication profiles and look at them again. Yep, sorry.
Okay, I'm wondering, Danielle, whether we might need to stop talking about this at the moment.
And not entirely. I think that's about right. I mean, we do have a little bit, we've still got 45 minutes, and I just wanted to, so I wanted to show some of the others. And I think one of the things I'm liking about the conversation, the point of additional bindings for me, is to help clarify what we're trying to do. And I think that this conversation and looking at the slicing is also making us re-look at these things and trying to understand if some of the things we have in here are because this is how the only tool we thought we had at the time, and to revisit if this is still what we think is appropriate in AU base. So I think it's raising for me that this is even more of that this topic and how we're treating the terminologies is something that we really do need some clarification on, and there's even more to be unpacked here than I thought there was. And so I just want to bring up as well then, looking at beyond immunization, we have how do we treat, I'll just go to AU-based medication, because the same slicing is present on the other medication resources: administration, statement, dispense, request. And we have here a similar sort of thing where we've got slicing now for PBS, although you'll note this is 0 to many instead of 0 to 1. For G10, we have AMT, we have MIMS, and similarly, there's preferred bindings there. In fact, I don't think any of them have required for that outside of the extension. And I think the question for me that I wanted to raise here is, do we really mean this? Is this something we can move to additional bindings, or really, I guess, have another discussion about why do we have these value sets and these slices present? What are we trying to say? Which I think when we first did this was really as simple as saying, these terminologies exist, and here's a way to find a value set for them. I think that's about what we started with. Does anyone disagree with that or have clarifications? Andy?
Trying to get my head around why, for those slices, given it's being called out, and as Richard noted, at the end of the day, for a number of these, it's simply a name and why we would have them as preferred and not required for the slice. So it can kind of say that you could do PBS, but not use a PBS code. And that's completely all right. Whereas I would have thought if you're going to do a PBS code, the whole point of it being that slice is because you're required to use the PBS code for it. It seems that having them preferred, I just get very confused. I think you raise a really good issue around these alternative approaches. But I think through this discussion, I probably got more confused because I probably never really looked at them and gone, what is the real semantics of this? Gone, oh yeah, that's the way to do it. Surely it's correct. Keep going. And now it's gone, preferred is, all of these are now raising questions about what really was intended for some of this. And I think one of the things that these do is represent the set of codings as kind of peers in coding, whereas the only thing I have with the other approach is you're really calling out two different grades of coding. Some of them are additional, but some of them are almost like the parent coding, whereas we don't have that relationship here.
Yes. Richard?
Yeah. I think we were doing here was there was an idea that we would show people bindings of interest. And so PBS and GTIN and AMT and MIMS package are bindings of interest, and that this tool and that slicing, which is in some sense a tooling for constraining, could be used as a tool for demonstration. So it says, if you use a PBS item codes are some codes you might want to use. So we'll create a slice which says PBS item codes. It's got a mandatory fixed value of system so that you can identify it as being part of this slice. And then it's a case of, and here's our preferred binding. It's a preferred binding because this is base and we don't want to constrain you too much, that making that a required or extensible binding is something that would happen in core. And so that's sort of, I think, part of the history for where this came up as a solution of saying, I want to tell people about how to do PBS without requiring them to do PBS. Now, there are other ways that could be done. The other thing is those little labels like coding PBS and coding GTIN, those slice names are purely they're purely documentation for people reading the profile. They're no part of what people send, and they're no part of the validation process. So they're sort of like labels, but perhaps people think they're more important, that those labels are more important than they are. So that was just sort of a bit more of a description of what I remember of where these things came from. I think I think a lot of their intent is demonstration. It is to show what are some choices and how they can be done. There may be better ways of saying that, and that would be good if there are better ways.
Which, if that was the intended pathway, the question is, can we do that with additional bindings? And which would be the value that we would select for purpose if that's what we were trying to do? If we were trying to, I guess, expose a set of, it's almost a menu. And I'm not sure out of this list which one would be appropriate.
Yeah, I have a question about this
No,
table. This has a preferred binding as one of the ones, but the example that got shown before has a recommended binding.
Yeah, that's my fault.
And I'm wondering where that recommended comes from.
My code. It's going to change back to preferred. I don't know why I did that.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Okay, so I wanted to raise this. I think I think we need to address this. And one of the reasons I'm raising it now and I want to push this forwards is because from an AU core sense, I think we need clarity around how we view and how we represent terminology in AU base, especially where we've put in multiple, I guess, where we've put in these multiple options and what do they really mean? And that's what I want us to push forwards as somewhat of a priority over the next couple of months, if that's something we can do. Are people interested in doing that, or will we just leave content as it stands? I guess because this work, we'll need the group to actually work through this. Are we happy to make that one of our things that we focus on over the next couple of months?
I am, because I think it's one of the things this shows is how easy it is for people to get confused in this area, and this would be a good opportunity to do something about that.
To me, this is only second to must support. In terms of its, I think the lack of understanding on the more complex intent of some of the uses of it, and because it is so widely used in so many resources, I think having more clarity around the intended use would be very useful.
Okay. I'm pretty happy then with where we've gotten to today, and I'm happy to go back to doing minutes and move on to the other agenda topics.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. I think, yeah, definitely the discussion shows that there's obviously, related to that, there's a lot of things that maybe are a little unclear and that we do need to work through and figure out the best way to go forward, whether it is additional bindings or whether they are kept as slices or how it's done. But yeah. Okay. So next up I shall share my screen. So next up on our agenda is project proposal, H7 AU Core Inferno test framework, Brett. And we do have a page set up, and Brett did send out an email around this yesterday, I believe, or the day before. Brett, did you want to give us an overview? Oh, has he disappeared? Maybe he's still disappeared. Okay. Thing in the comments. No, I've lost Brett. Okay. Is that something that anyone else is able to talk to, or shall we leave that until either
I might leave that
or
to see if Brett comes back. I don't have a copy of it.
I was mute, Jillian. Hello.
Hey.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. There is a project scope statement and also a project proposal in the discussion section of the FHIR Work Group Confluence pages there. So primarily the Inferno test project is setting up Inferno as a test framework. So the idea is that we're setting up a hosted test environment to allow us to do things like test AU Core at connectathons and move towards having some useful validation tools basically to verify systems. So that proposal has the content in it. I did send an email out through the week, so hopefully some people have looked at it. But primarily it's just to enable an official handling of that hosting and the development of that as part of an HL7 Australia project, so it can go forward. We're getting support from the Spark Accelerator to do the work and help set that up. But it's primarily it's just so that we can carry it on into the future. So there's basically I think we'll just say we would need to report back to the FHIR Work Group about what's happening and how it's going, but I don't think there's any major work involved for the committee as such, unless we want to make it so. So it was more just if people were happy with that proposal, it would be great if we could vote on that today. Otherwise, we'll probably just put it out for an e-vote in the near future.
Is there any questions or comments around that? Is anyone
open it?
The actual
the PDF. Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's actually two documents in there. There's a proposal and a project scope statement. So proposal is basically, yes, we agree the project exists. And then the project scope statement is the initial scope of work, which is focused on AU Core. So I'm not sure if there's further discussion, but I would move to pass. I would probably table to vote. Actually, move to pass both of those documents. But of course, if people think they want more time, please do speak up.
A question I've got is, I presume this has been raised because there are people interested in using it and people interested in building it, and people who will, who are willing to put in the resources to it. The only way I can see a downside to this is if it will draw resources away from other things that the group thinks is more important. I suspect that's unlikely. I suspect that this would happen anyway with or without the group's approval. It just would happen outside this group. Is that a reasonable summary?
I think that's a very good summary, Richard, because, yeah, effectively it's going to be, it is part of the Spark activity, and it's mainly to support some of the engagement validation stuff Spark's doing, but it'll also be available for connectathons. So this was really very much just enabling us to have a destination of HL7 Australia, so that it wasn't something that disappeared in the future because the actual development work or something was somehow encumbered. So primarily it was to be able to park the IP in HL7 Australia for any of the development work, and also essentially head towards having the hosting and provisioning done by HL7 Australia as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, Richard. It's gonna happen anyway. So it was more just to ensure that yes, we can have an HL7 Australia repository, and there was going to be some HL7 Australia resource usage, which initially won't be a thing. But I think towards the end of the Spark period, it may well be that the HL7 Australia takes over the costs and running of that.
Thanks, Brett. I mean, as project facilitator, I'm happy to second Brett's motion.
Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so we might go to a vote then. Does anyone abstain? If you want to pop your hand up in the Okay, so I've got Christy abstaining, Brian abstaining and hand up. Do you want to actually talk, Brian? Or you're just figuring out what you... Oh, no, they've gone. Okay. Sorry, Christy and Brian, were they actual abstains and you've removed them?
Yeah, just abstains.
Yep.
Actually,
Okay.
it's
All right.
abstain here too. Yeah.
Okay, so the two, Danielle, and anybody who wants to vote negative, please raise your hand now. Nope. Okay, so all remaining affirmative. Thank you. Okay, great. Let's go back to the agenda. Okay, number 7 on our agenda, we have unified terminology governance. So this, again, Danielle was going to give us a overview of this and what we need to do.
Oh, I think that's going a bit far about, you know, what we need to do, but yeah, I'll have a go. So the unified terminology governance. So if you can click through under consensus review and voting process. So what's sort of come up, and Michael Osborne kind of raised this with the FHIR Working Group co-chairs, that when we submit, and I guess by we I mean we're surfacing up or content that's coming out of the projects going on in Australia, and we're thinking that that the requirements aren't Australian specific and they belong in the international terminology space, and we want to promote those requirements up. When you do that, one of the things that happens is there's a consensus review and voting process. For the people who are on the line, Michael Osborne, since you're already a voter, you might actually be able to be better give a brief on what that is, if you're happy to.
Sorry, for me to give that, would it be better for Brian or maybe Ruben? They understand the process more. So what I've been trying to do is promote Australian content from HL7AU. Sorry, the background noise is pretty high here. Up into the UTG and into THO. And the process requires voters from Australia to get behind some of these tickets. And at the moment, we're just trying to work out who that group of people is from HL7AU, who we want to vote on it. I guess that's what we're looking at doing. Is that about right, Danielle?
Yes, that's what's come to the co-chairs, is to say that this is there, and we are. It hasn't really been brought to the FHIR Working Group attention, and I think it is. I think it should be. I think we need to go through and talk about the consensus review and voting, and to consider nominating people who would be appropriate to participate in the voting process, not just necessarily for things that come from Australia, but across the other spaces. There is a process there on how to vote. As you sort of scroll down, where it talks about the HL7 voting members can do that, and you need to fill out this form. And I think that's how you became a voter, Michael, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, basically, yeah, I got someone from International to add me, because I had to, you know, do the submission, which means doing a pull request, you know, from Jira, etc. So quite a long process.
So I think what we need to do is talk about this, and who we think should join as a voter, and also encourage people to get involved in the UTG consensus review process. There's also a mention in there of your work Group has appointed you as an oversight voter. And I wonder whether or not we can have that from a HL7AU FHIR Work Group. Do we qualify to have an oversight voter?
There are some hands up, Danielle.
Oh, I can't see them. Jane, can you demonstrate that?
Ruben, are you?
Yeah, look, I've got to declare myself as quite deeply involved with this stuff with international in my co-chair of the Terminology Services Management Group, which has responsibility for the operation of the UTG governance process and publication of THO. I put my hand up because I wanted to draw a very clear distinction between participants who are able to submit proposals through UTG. That's one cohort, and I think that's probably what you signed up for, Michael. It allows you to create proposals and to create the actual draft changes in a branch and all of that stuff, which is part of UTG. So that's the one cohort. The other cohort are actually the authorized voters who can vote on change requests as part of the UTG process. That is a restricted set of voters. I happen to be one of them. But there are about, I think, 7 or 8. But that set of voters are being looked at the moment, and I know there's always a desire to get a broader global participation in this rather than it being predominantly voters from the United States. So I just wanted to make that point. And secondly, I guess, Danielle, in terms of the overall strategy around this, THO is typically only for content which has reached a certain level of maturity. And there is a policy around that for code systems, which I've put a link into the chat for. If the goal is to give things greater visibility, that's certainly a pathway to do it. I just wanted to flag that it's usually only for things which have reached FMM level 3 or higher. And if it isn't quite there, but you still think it's globally relevant, there are some potential other publication pathways to consider, including the extension spec, I suppose. Ray, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else to that. And you're on mute, Graham, if you're speaking. All right, nothing further. Happy to take questions, of course.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, mine's, I think, probably is a question. Well, I'll just ask the question. Ruben's partly asked my question. The question was, how much are we looking at the governance of Australian terminology and choosing things to then be offered to HL7 International, and how much are we talking about how we participate, or whether we become voters with HL7 International terminology? I think that was a clear question.
Yes, I think that the topic was about the second part, the how do we get involved in the voting in the consensus review process, and should we, and so forth. The first one on how do we do that, well, to date, that's been through the FHIR Working Group meetings and through Zulip, where I think that's been raised, and we've said, oh yes, that would be good to go to international, and it's been a discussion in this kind of forum.
Thank you for that clarification.
So Danielle, this is a last point on that topic of us having greater participation. You're more than welcome to come, or any of the co-chairs could come to one of the TSMG meetings, and I guess just put forward what you'd like to see happen, and it can certainly be considered. As I said, the voters at the moment are appointed by the HL7 International Technical Steering Committee based on recommendations from the Terminology Services Management Group. And as I said, that set of voters are currently being looked at, both in terms of membership and also voting powers and things like that. So now is certainly a good time for people to seek to put themselves forward.
I want to get a bit more clarification. Michael, do you have the link to the JIRA ticket of the most recent one? Are you able to put that in the chat? Because I think from my memory, when it was raised with me, I think the part of the process we're looking at was it needed to get 13 votes to go to the next step. And I wonder if that's yes, sorry.
That's true. Sorry, that is true. Yeah, I think I also wonder because that I wasn't clear on what FMM level the codes needed to be at for them to get into the international, and I think it's a bit clearer now that Ruben has said it's FMM3, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, that's the recommendation.
Right. And I just wonder how much of our stuff would be at that level.
Well, I guess that's a case-by-case basis. Some of it would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, not internationally, but within Australia, potentially, yes. And maybe internationally, those concepts.
That's good enough.
Because what's the criteria again for FMM3? Let me just have a look. And I assume we're talking about the FHIR maturity model, and there isn't a localized one?
Not yet.
Maturity level. Okay. So FMM3, verified by the work group as meeting conformance resource quality guidelines, subject to a round of formal balloting, and has at least 10 distinct implementer comments recorded in the tracker drawn from at least 3 organizations that have resulted in at least one substantive change. Oh, gee, what if everything's perfect? But, you know, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, close to.
Okay.
You could certainly. One thing that happens is something gets reformed into a state that's good. And then you can't meet these criteria, but you can show that this criteria counts for working up towards a working state. And in all of the work I've ever seen anywhere, I've never seen anything go through because it was perfect first time.
Just drop in the chat there the FHIR maturity levels link for people.
There's one other thing to be aware of, which might pose a concern to adopters of any of these artifacts, and that is when things become part of THO, they typically have their URL changed so that the domain name in the URL is terminology.hl7.org. So obviously you can see how that can be a bit of an adoption transition concern, but that's what happens.
I don't think that's so far. I think from Australia, the majority of the things we've tried to promote, if not, I think the only things we've attempted to promote is to add codes into existing code systems, where we've thought that instead of having a HL7AU specific code or HL7AU specific code system for that it belonged in the international set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just something to flag.
And I'm really just trying to track down that latest one. Through looking through the chat.fire.org logs.
So do you mean the one that I logged, Danielle? Because I just stuck it in the chat. It's in the chat. So it's UP474.
Can you navigate to that, Jane? Just so we can show people what that looks like.
Right, so you can see on the right, yep, I can see it. On the right, under the people heading, are the list of people who can vote in the various OSG voting groups. and you'll see Graham's a member of one of those as well.
Yeah, do need to poke me so I know about it.
Yeah.
And if we scroll down, because there's a nice form and everything that shows, I think, who's voted and how that's.
I think that's a tab at the top under voting and quorum summary. So as Brian will tell you, because he has been through this process so much, he's pretty much a veteran at it right now. Part of this does include a bit of advocating for your change and approaching people listed on the right to have a look and either vote A or nay to support it or not. And that tends to be a significant part of the job of this, but certainly not insurmountable. And if you see people's names in a couple of those categories, they're really good people to approach because their votes get you more votes towards your goal.
So I think I have a question here. There's on the right, there's OSG voters, and one of those is OSG voters realm specific. Does Australia have a representative there?
We have representatives in the international one. Not in realm specific. I think realm specific is really a poorly worded one. I think it probably is designed for US realm related voting, but international is, I suppose, where non-US voters find themselves.
And so what's the recommendation then? Should we be seeking to add voters from the Australian realm? And how should we do that? Does that need to go through HL7 Australia?
I don't think it needs to go through a formal sort of thing from the board or anything like that. I'd suggest, Danielle, that in the first instance that one of the FHIR Work Group co-chairs approach the TSMG management group to let it be known that you'd like representation in one of these cohorts, either under the current design or when this changes. Ultimately, the decision, as I said, goes to the technical steering committee. They might, and I'm not sure about this, whether the International Council actually have a role in any of this. I don't think they have in the past, but they might be seeking the nomination to come from the International Council, in which case the HL7 Australia board and Isabel as chair can certainly try and facilitate that. What I can tell you is that not everyone on this list on the right is very active, and that's part of the reason they're looking to refresh these voters at the moment.
Okay, so I would recommend, I guess, that we take an action that the FHIR Working Group co-chairs does indeed contact TSMG.
Yeah, and also as a last point, Danny, I wanted to add that there is no reason whatsoever that non-US HL7 standards developers can't form part of any of those other OSG voter groups like FHIR, V3 or V2 or CDA. They are not exclusively US-based people. Well, I guess the fact that Graham and I are there is evidence of that.
Okay.
The list of OSG voters, which has got 21, does that include everybody in the smaller groups? So that's
I believe it does. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think this conversation has come to its conclusion about, we've got some next steps on what we need to do.
Yep.
Okay,
And
great.
if anyone of the co-chairs or anyone else is interested in attending the next TSMG meeting, it is this Friday morning, Australia time, 8 a.m. Brisbane time. I'll put the link to that meeting in the chat as well.
Thanks, Raven. Okay. Right, well, that is the end of our agenda, apart from the next meeting. So our next meeting is our face-to-face meeting in Sydney. Proposing to drop the 13th. unless anyone has any strong views against that, as it's the week before the face-to-face.
I support keeping it, Jane.
Right.
Undoubtedly, there'll be things coming up.
Anybody else?
Yeah, look, I'd be happy to do that. I think we haven't gone through the agenda and planning on that, and it might be good to spend some time going through some preparation for the face-to-face meeting in our next conference call.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I think it might be worth, we could even discuss dropping the one after, maybe, if we are happy that we've had enough for a 2-week period. Yep.
I think that sounds very sensible.
That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Right, well, next meeting is the 13th of March then.
Yeah, can I just talk a little bit on Connectathon then for folks, because I think the thing we want to highlight is, including for the face-to-face meeting and the Connectathon, is some of these events are sold out, but there is a wait list, and I'm just trying to get that text now, and I'll post that in the chat. About okay, so I've put that in the chat now. If you've missed out on a ticket for a session, please email events@hl7.com.au with the sessions that you want to go on the wait list for. And it's very likely, I think, at this stage, that you'll get a ticket. So get onto that when you can. I did send out the email to this group and the others, giving all the links to what the different Eventbrite sessions are. And they've also been updated now on the locations across the days. So we do have a location. They are all the Sydney CBD. Is there anything else that we need to highlight for people, Brett, or about the Connectathon or facilities?
It's notable on the first day of the Connectathon, the two groups are split by a short walk, because one group is in Ridges and one group's in the other hotel. But the second day, I think we're in the same venue. So just note that if you're planning to. I'm not sure we've allocated which group is going where yet, or have we?
I think Alette might have updated that. I've not checked, but I'm pretty sure she has.
Yeah, because I think there was a lot of difficulty getting rooms. It's notable we don't have any extra breakout rooms. So that's an issue. We have to sort of plan on what we're going to do. If we want to do breakouts, we might be going to the park or doing it in the main room. So I think that just needs, the coaches will have to, the organisers for the tracks, or the track leads will have to figure out what we're going to do for those things. That's probably the logistics side. Work group meeting on the first day. We have AU Core and the FHIR Work Group meeting running concurrently. So you'll have to decide, which one you want to go to.
So in this case, they're just different rooms, not entirely different hotels. So you can just bop in between the two as needed.
Yeah, and we're working towards getting an agenda together, at least for the FHIR Work Group, to let people know what topics are going to be running when, and we could probably have a negotiation as well if people have big conflicts and want to run between the groups. I see Ruben's hand.
Yeah, mine's not a Connectathon question, so happy for you to come back to me if there's other questions or comments on the Connectathon you want to get through.
I'll let Jane do that.
No? I just want to know how signups are looking for the ballot, Brett. Do we have an idea of the numbers so far?
I can give you an absolutely current number. going quite well, especially compared to previous ballots. One moment, I'll just get you a absolutely current number. 43. So we have
That
43
is significant.
yeah, and around a dozen different organizations. So that's good. And a bunch of individuals.
Great.
Yeah, there's like a dozen organizations represented and at least a dozen individuals as well.
There's some homework for you, Brett. Can you further break that down to see how much coverage of Australia we have, given where those individuals, organizations are based?
Yeah, I can do that. We'll do a bit of a I can definitely present that back. Yeah, I'll continue sending out reminders as well. The last one worked pretty well. We got an extra 20 people on, so yeah, I'll keep that people getting reminded on that. And also there's been a few queries coming through about ballot process and things like that. We're hoping to get some sessions together about going through on how to vote and things like that as well. That's part of the exercise. We're talking to HL7 International around the ballot definition and setting that up, and yeah, so we hopefully will have some more material to directly support people. You know, I think this is part of this exercise the first time as well, is to get people get across how we do this, but also get people into the process as well without it being you know, more a comment ballot. So that hopefully takes the pressure off. So yeah, hopefully we can get people across this stuff, including what we need to do on our side in terms of the Access for Australia work.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brett.
No worries. Thanks, Richard.
When do we expect the next snapshot of AU base to happen?
There will be there will be
9th
one
of
to go
March.
along. Yeah, there will be one to go along with the AU core release, because there's material the AU core is referencing that hasn't been published yet in a snapshot. So there will be a snapshot that goes along with the AU core ballot.
Okay, there'll be a pigeon pair. Okay.
Yeah, so there'll be a pair. AU core is the only thing getting voted on, but of course AU base may be essentially relevant for anything you know, that in any of the spec sort of feedback. So we'll certainly take that on as well, and we may end up with issues coming through to the FHIR Work Group as specific things that need addressing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as well, just a point as well, was, you know, that's a snapshot for to put AU core ballot. I expect we will actually go to ballot on AU base in August as well. So we'll actually, I think, so that way we have a pair that is approved to go together, because we can't really release AU core without AU base. Yep.
Okay. We are at time, and if there's no other pressing comments or questions, then we'll leave it for today and see everybody again on the 13th.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.